get started. Well, welcome everybody to the Ask an Accountant podcast, where we demystify accounting by simply asking your pressing questions from the industry's best and brightest. My name's Tony Wilson, your host, quirky friend, and total accounting nerd. Today I'm joined by my friend, Tiffany Bisconer, a certified public accountant with over 20 years of experience in the fields of accounting and tax. She's served as operational manager, controller, CFO, tax professional consultant, and the list goes on and on. But above all of these titles, anybody who knows Tiffany knows that the most fitting title for her is good human. Tiffany, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. And I think that is the only one that matters, that last title there, hopefully.
Right? That's what I'm saying. You know, I one of the core values at Equip is no experts, only servants, because at the end of the day, that's like really what we are. Like, you are very, very well accomplished. You've been in the industry for such a long time, but it's how you interact and how you show up and how you made people feel that's ultimately going to make the biggest impact. So I'm super glad to have you on the show today, Tiffany. We've got a lot to cover. But before we dive into some of that crazy and fun stuff, I want to start off actually by giving a shout out to our mutual friend, Stephanie Sims. She was the one who connected us up only almost like a month ago, I think now. So Stephanie, thank you so much for connecting us. And this is just also a quick shout out. I am still reading her book, Funding Your Business Without Selling Your Soul, and it is amazing. So if you haven't had a chance, go check it out now. I think you can get it on Amazon. But yeah, super great. She's an amazing person. So I'm curious, Tiffany, there's got to be an origin story about how you guys are friends now. How did you guys meet?
It's a funny question because from my general perspective, I feel like I've always known Stephanie. But talk about another amazing human, and really our connecting points came from serving the entrepreneurial community here in Phoenix and beyond. And the moment I interacted with that incredible human, I was attached to her side. So somebody I continuously gain inspiration from as a friend, as a professional, just as a rad human all the way around. So
totally rad. And I'm honestly like a little jealous because you guys have like this cool little pocket of people out in Arizona, and like apparently the startup scene where you guys are is like popping.
Yep, not going to be biased or anything, but we do have some incredible minds in this area. And I think, Tony, you should make a trip out. How about that?
Why not? I think that would be great. I will say, climate-wise, we are in stark contrast, Minnesota versus Arizona.
Oh, hey, I heard you were at like 80 degrees.
Yeah, it's true. That is true.
That's basically 120 in Arizona standards for you.
Yeah, so that's, oh my gosh, seriously, Tom. I just keep on hearing that Arizona is a dry heat, so maybe it's fine.
Unless it's monsoon season, which is current week ailments for Phoenix
really?
Folks. Yes.
Gross. Ooh,
30% humidity is like 40% more than normal. So
yeah, seriously, yeah,
quick math on that.
Yeah, so it's normally super dry in Arizona, but I guess it does get humid there.
Very, very seldomly, but yes.
Crazy stuff. Well, I will say, even if it doesn't get super hot here, it does get really muggy because we got so many lakes. But all this to say, if I get a chance to come down to Arizona, I'll probably come over the winter time so I can escape the frigid cold.
There you go. I would support that.
It'll be so great. So Tiffany, I would love if you could share a little bit about your story. Right now, you're a partner at a firm. So you've been in this industry for over 20 years, like we talked about. So you've got a lot of experience to get you to where you are today. Do you want to just share a little bit about that story? Where did you start off, and what was that progress like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a lot of what I usually fall back onto when I'm talking about my story is kind of this idea of doing things a different way, right? So I know from the roots or from the beginning of kind of my journey as a human, my guiding light really has always been, how do I figure myself out in order to figure out what I can do in the world that has some kind of meaning? And from the perspective of being a very active minded and active hearted person from the beginning, that kind of transpired in a lot of different eclectic ventures to try to figure out how do I plug myself in a way that's meaningful with the time that I have. And I can say from an urgency perspective, I don't remember a time in my life where I haven't felt the urgency of trying to be as alive as I possibly can, knowing that I am going to croak before I get to my desires as a human and what I want to experience and what I want to be able to do from an impact perspective. So really the beginning of my life was really focused on the desire to create. As an artist, as somebody who is really interested in learning how to express both the trials and tribulations of being a human, but also to understand what this thing means of being alive, what it means to connect with other humans. So I've been an artist my whole life. And I think the pathway initially for me was driven in that direction just because the desire to express, the desire to build, the desire to create was so strong that I needed to find ways to do that as much as possible in every breathing, waking hour. And then with the idea of obviously having a brain that has both creative and analytical function, I'm also a highly analytical person and like to dive in and contemplate how to put things together in a way that's even more efficient or more meaningful. So kind of the pathway of my life, I think until this point has been something that I've never really seen a model for, which is basically like the dive in, do the thing as best as you can, move on to the next thing and compound on that knowledge. So really the simplified pathway is, as an artist, then moving into wanting to build things, then wanting to build businesses, then understanding that when you look at a business, there's two sides, right? There's the strategic and operational side of a business. And then there's also the pathway of growth and the vision to hold it together. And kind of diving into helping to start and grow and raise businesses, starting from the finance side as well as the creative side, and realizing how there was a lot of bifurcation between those, either within organizations or even within myself, of not knowing exactly how to connect those two pieces in a joint venture. It was more of, okay, I'm creative over here, and then I'm going to be really analytical and business minded and do the business thing over here. And slowly I started to unravel that and realize, hey, look, I only have so much time. So I need to figure out a way to plug in myself the best way that I possibly can in order to actually utilize both of those things at the same time. Because the parallel living that I did for a long time, which is, doing things in the art, on my off time, then doing things within business or finance on my on time when it came to the professional life, there's only so much more time. And, as of more recently, I realized sleep and things like that are probably stuff that I should try to factor in at some point as well. So,
I hear it's important to sleep.
I push back a little bit on the metrics sometimes because I'm like, look, 8 hours seems virtually impossible, but I do understand wellness and health, and everybody needs to make sure that they listen to their body. That's important. So
that's good. That is so good. Okay, so 2 quick questions, follow-up questions then on your story. So you mentioned about the arts and just how impactful or like integral that has been for you your whole life. What are the mediums, or what were the mediums that you primarily employed?
Not anything and everything. So I think as most artists notice, inspiration comes from all directions. And when I say artist, I really mean actually all humans. Because I do believe that when you stay open to inspiration, that that idea of taking information and applying it in novel ways is kind of the heart of innovation and also creating anything. So for me, I've been a dancer. I toured internationally for about 10 years and ran a dance production company as well. I've been a writer for all forever. I think one of the first progress notes I got as a child was like, pre-kindergarten of how I'm apparently a poet. Haven't really risen to that level in my adult life yet, but and then same thing, painting, drawing, anything basically to kind of release basically from an expression standpoint.
That's so cool. So it's literally any and all art forms. You're just like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to try it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's some that I'm missing or I haven't tried yet, but I'm definitely open to all of it. I mean, I think for me, moving energy through my body through dance is probably one of the most impactful things that I've done in my life, because being a dancer is you're the artist and you're also the art, right?
Hmm.
So it's this idea of not being able to hide behind anything,
Hmm.
which was also, a very interesting thing to unravel, and
Hmm.
understanding that the root of where you're coming from an expression standpoint, kind of unraveling something that's not fake, that's not just a performance, is something that continues to teach and guide me even in my life in general.
Hmm.
So
Love that. Oh my goodness. So cool. And it's fun to hear you talk about this, because when I think about the traditional accountant's path, when I think about like what does it look like to enter into this, those what you just said is not necessarily what I would assume is the kind of the norm to get into accounting. But I think as I've myself been on my own journey, I realize there's a lot of different ways that people find themselves in the accounting space at some point in their career. And so I really appreciate that. I appreciate that you're showing that there's not a predefined box into getting into this space. And we're gonna get into this in a minute, but like it's not like you're just like I'm a staff accountant, and not that there's anything wrong with staff accountants, but it's not like you're entry level your entire career. It's not like something you do just to make money. It's like something you are passionate about, and you are arguably probably one of the best equipped people to talk about it. So you're also like, I don't know, super intelligent with this stuff too. Anyway, I'm super excited about that. One other question I had for you though is, because you and I were talking about this earlier, when was the first time you started working? Like, at what age were you when you worked your first job?
yeah, so I mean, the official memory is 10. I'm sure it happened before that. Before that, I was kind of on the entrepreneurial path
Yeah.
of just establishing products and services and doing whatever I could do door to door, which was probably, looking back, maybe not the best strategy. But yeah, no, I've since then, I've really, so I blame it on kind of being tall for my age. So back in the day, there was less checking of things from a computer perspective. So maybe I looked older than I was. But yeah, I started working officially when I was 10. I started managing cafes by the time I was 13, 14. And then I just literally have not stopped since. So it is, I definitely have a work ethic, and I definitely understand that making money and learning how to use it in a way that's meaningful for your life is something that I think is important for everybody, right? So money is only as important as what you put it to use for. And I would say the same thing for knowledge. Knowledge is only as good as what you put it to use for.
Right.
So we can know a lot of smart things in our head, but if we're not actually employing that in a meaningful way, to me, I don't think that's intelligence. That's just kind of the holding of information.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so I think, and then kind of like, I don't know, circling back on this whole leaping point of, for me, just being an activist, being a humanitarian, like really identifying things that I feel like maybe aren't just or right in the world, and then wanting to do something about it deeply is really what has guided that path. So I know we're kind of probably going to lead into that leaping point, but for me, it really was this quest of how do I learn as much as I possibly can about the things that I'm seeing that are harming people, and the accounting and the tax and the rules and regulations of what you need to look out for so you don't get hurt was a big part of that initiative, because I had never in my life dreamed of becoming an accountant or becoming a CPA. It was not an aspiration of mine in any manner. But it was a huge challenge, and it was also something that I thought would be able to be captured in a way that I can then take knowledge to make it actually useful for the people that need it.
Yeah, that's so cool. So if I'm hearing correctly what you're saying, there was already this drive and this passion behind you, and rather than just seeing everything that's wrong in the world or seeing things that are harming people, you took it on yourself to say, I'm going to learn this so I can use these things that I think are maybe holding certain people back, or maybe people aren't able to be fully unleashed, and you're now learning it so that you can be the solution to the problems that you're seeing.
Yeah, I would say definitely. I mean, I've always been a questioner. So whether it be being a young anarchist or young punk rocker or whatever the case is, just questioning things, wanting to know the whys, wanting to understand why people are subject to certain things, and then realizing there's certain systems, at least at this point, that are actually injuring people's lives,
Hmm.
because they don't know. And if it wasn't already an innate desire, the moment I first heard somebody say, well, taxes are made for the ignorant to pay,
Hmm.
that to me was like, okay, so why are they ignorant? And
Mm-hmm.
why is that a punishment when it comes to something that really should be taught much earlier?
Yeah.
And so I just try to keep going back as far as I can to the beginning to educate on things that at least that I know about. And I'm a little microcosm in this universe, but it's like, if at least I can focus on the things that I know how to impact in a positive way, then that's what I'm going to do.
That's right. And I love that. And honestly, like I learned from that because that's such the right approach to take. You have problems that you see in the world, and it's easy to some extent to just be a critic and sit on the sidelines and say, "Oh, this is terrible. It's terrible. It's terrible." It's a lot harder to dive in the middle of it, to learn these things, to actually practice these things so that you can be that change. So I think that's super commendable. That's
Well,
awesome.
and I think that's it was funny because after our last conversation, I was inspired, and as we've already indicated, I'm kind of a thinker. But from this idea of that applies in all things, right? So when I think about even just the pathway of becoming a fully realized human, whatever that means to each person, it takes effort and it takes diligence and it takes discipline to continuously look at yourself and your behaviors, to continuously look at the way you think about things, to accept the fact that no matter how much I try to learn in this world, I'm going to have blind spots all over the place. And it's just a fact of life because I haven't been exposed to the entire universe and all the thought processes in it, right? So it is kind of that humbleness of understanding that I never know enough and I'm never going to know enough, but I'm going to act on the things that I do know with full heart. And hopefully with that action, I'll continue to evolve my own personal ability to be aware of what is out there and what are the options for things. Right. But I think that if each of us can do that more and more and more, we also set up the permissions for the people that we sit in front of to do that themselves. And I know that that can be a very scary place to go into when it comes to, hey, how about we all sit down and say we don't know anything and figure out what we actually have to learn to get to a place of transparency and truth.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And so I know that there's micro parts of that happen within my daily conversations. I get the joy of being able to sit in front of people that are absolutely brilliant and doing a lot of work personally, but also in the world. And I'm incredibly humbled by those, love warriors or whatever the hell you want to call them.
Yeah.
Like in the sense of just really like diving into life and figuring out how do we do this thing so that we can all benefit from each other.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, I love that. And I think what you're addressing is when there's alignment in an individual and they take that and they operate out of a place of being really aligned personally, professionally, there's something that's electric that happens when they then go to serve their clients, the people that they work with. There's just like extra energy and momentum, I think, that's built. And I think it's so important, and I'm sure it's part of the reason why you pursue it is greater and greater alignment. So I actually have some questions for you about that. I know this is something that you're passionate to kind of talk about, but you've talked a lot about the importance with me of personal and professional alignment in your own journey. Can you tell me a time where you realized you were not in alignment in your job, and what was that like for you?
Yeah. So it's interesting. Like this life thing is very interesting, right? So
Yep.
we all make our stumbles and we all try to do what we think is the right thing to do. But I can definitely say, at least for me personally, nothing has been more alienating, heartbreaking, and like soul deadening than feeling like I couldn't be valued for the human that I am, and actually felt that I had to either suppress, quiet, or not activate parts of myself that I felt were the most meaningful to me. And it's very interesting to feel that in a professional setting and to now kind of be a champion when it comes to trying to identify those scenarios to also try to help people out of them, because nothing is worse than feeling your spirit get crushed because you're not able to be yourself. And is potentially soft as that sounds, it really internally, I think it causes most of the problems in the world. Because if you're not able to feel supported to try to do something that you feel is meaningful, that typically turns into either a deadening of spirit, which then leads to lack of potential, which leads to lack of drive, which leads to depression, which leads to all of these things of just feeling like, why do I even belong here? And it's a really heavy and deep conversation from my perspective. And kind of coming from some of those dark places, I don't underestimate the impact of being in the wrong environment and being in the wrong types of relationships and being in the wrong type of professional setting. And not wrong maybe for what it is, but wrong for you.
For you, yeah.
And I think for me, it's taken a long time also to realize is I don't have to understand necessarily the why. I just have to trust that I know when something doesn't feel right to me and have the courage to actually face that and make a change that does feel right to me. And it's a scary place to be in, because sometimes it really, when you talk about alignment, it is kind of such a vague word, and it is kind of a feeling word, and it is kind of an intuitive word. But when I first got my CPA license, I had already been working in industry. I've been in private industry. I mean, it was like the next thing was just kind of going to a bigger CPA firm and just kind of understanding what that was all about. Obviously, as we talked before, I've had a pretty long trajectory of working and being in the, whatever you call it, the real world, or getting kicked around, something like that. But going into a structure where the system and the hierarchy was more important than the individual, to me, it made absolutely zero sense. And I continued to fight and fight and fight and fight and try to stand up and talk and think and move. And I was like, you know what, this is something that's actually destroying the potential of the greatest assets of organizations. And it was not just my journey, but I see that a lot, where they try to take people and stick them in as cogs in this system without first understanding what does that individual have that's unique to them, that they can actually make all of this better. And kind of being in that position, staying probably a little bit longer than I should have from my own like personal health perspective, but really trying to figure out, okay, how is there a way to kind of make a difference from the inside? Is there a way to kind of change the system? And I think there is a larger conversation to happen, especially now with the change of times within the profession in general, within the CPA profession and within professional services, of how can we reimagine a way to actually bring people in and allow an expansion of the industry based on what they're bringing into the company, as opposed to trying to force down a structure that doesn't necessarily work. And I think we're seeing it with retention. We're seeing it through lack of engagement. We're seeing it through the challenge of hiring. So there's a lot there.
Seriously though. And, one thing that comes to my mind, and this is kind of something we talked about, practically, when you were working in that practice, that CPA practice, and you would maybe prioritize the human connection with your clients, and it's not necessarily like billable work, you're just connecting with them as humans, and you were just sharing a little bit about how that made you feel. Do you want to maybe share that a little bit more?
Yeah, it's to me, it's again, I guess I live by the idea that the human is first, right? So this idea of whatever role we have, whatever systems we have, to me, none of that actually matters. What matters to me is the human in front of me, and then what are we going to do together to make cool things, right? So it is that feeling and the way things are structured, especially with the billable hour, right? So you have to be completely aware of how you're spending your time. And unfortunately, in my experience, spending time with clients to actually understand what they need, want, and to create connections and relationships isn't something that's necessarily supported and or celebrated. It may at some of the ranks be something that's important, but from the perspective of human involvement, it is something that would be non-billable time to sit and actually have a half an hour conversation with a client to understand, what are they scared of? What are they up against? What are their challenges? What are they thinking about doing? And what I notice, being now on this side of the fence as well, is a lot of times that actually leads to blind spots in understanding what clients need and or opportunities to proactively address what you can do to actually help them get to where they want to go. Because in no scenario really is an end of the year look back going to be something that's going to be able to help with proactive planning.
Oh yeah.
So it all has to come from the relationship, the trust, and actually having conversations with people to understand what is meaningful to them.
Yeah. My goodness. So you mean to tell me that we actually need to like have relationships and like have conversations with the people we serve. What? This is weird.
At least that's my philosophy.
Yeah. I think that's a great. I will say I very much affirm it and support that. As you were talking about the hours thing, this is actually something that's been a hot button topic. I know we're starting to see an industry shift. And Blake Oliver, shout out to Blake Oliver. He was the one that actually introduced me to this concept of like, yeah, maybe time tracking just doesn't make sense for these firms anymore. And I know there's a number of other, influencers on LinkedIn who share that same vision. But yeah, I wonder if that's even going to be around in the next 20 years, to be honest.
Yeah, I think there is going to be a big shift, and I think now more than ever, the collaborative services model is something that is just going to be where things are at. I mean, business owners have more complex needs. Everything continues to get more complex, from the tax landscape to the accounting landscape to the business landscape to the global landscape. So this idea of creating a more integrated and integral, like the consulting, but also just advisory circle around business owners is going to be super important.
Yeah.
And I think, back to the time tracking thing, just again, from a human perspective, there's nothing more jarring from a mortality perspective than to have to, document every micro minute of your day and seeing your life and your time go. And when I say that, I think part of kind of what I dive into, even just as a personal philosophy, is just remembering life, remembering death, remembering that they're both here, right? And they're both walking with us. So the choices that we make in a day, that's kind of why I always feel that urgency also too of, question where you're at, question how you're feeling, question if this is the right fit. Try to evaluate different options. Keep your eyes open when it comes to identifying things that make you feel like you want to gravitate towards them, and then continue to gain the knowledge in whatever field that you're in to be able to, again, make a difference, do something for yourself that makes you feel like you can actually engage.
Yeah.
Life is too short. And if the past couple of years haven't really like nailed that in, I think it's really important that everybody has periods of reevaluation. Are we in the right spot? Are we moving in the right direction? What do we need to do to shift it?
Yeah, that is so good. So as we talk about alignment, we talk about these things of like kind of just being a more holistic human. Something that I have found has been a very helpful exercise is crystallizing in a singular statement, that which is kind of the North Star for me as a person. So personal mission statement, huge fan of it. It did take me a little while for me to do mine. Is it okay if I share mine real quick?
Please.
Okay. So mine goes, lead others to more abundant life, illuminating that path through education and inspiring action with creativity and joy. So that's
beautiful.
That's that's what I use to kind of like guide me, especially on my professional career. So Tiffany, as a very aligned or becoming more aligned human, I would love for us to hear your personal mission statement.
So anybody who knows me, I'm usually a long-winded person, if anybody's ever gotten a text from me, right? So it's very, very contemplative, long-winded. But for me, this is my go-to, which is I help cool people do cool shit. And I think the layers of that, obviously, for myself are like written and detailed back to every single detail, but that really is what I do. Yep. I show up fully as myself. I connect with the person in front of me. I figure out what I can do, and then I do it.
Yeah. And I think a perfect launching board about one of those things that you do to help people do those cool things is you are an R&D tax specialist. And I hate to break it to anybody else, but R&D Tax Credit is potentially one of the coolest things that's out there. I don't care what anybody else says. I think it's fascinating. And I think Tiffany knows a decent amount of stuff. So I've got some pressing questions if I can probe, if that's cool.
Yes, please, probe away.
Okay. So first of all, what are these credits and why are you so passionate about educating CPAs and business owners about them?
Oh, yeah. So back to, this is probably one of the coolest things that exists. So for me personally, I'm super excited about anything when you talk about research and development or R&D, because really the premise of innovation is that exact combination of creativity and a technical ability So to innovate anything, it's kind of that merger of the two worlds that I've balanced between my entire life. So being able to sit in front of people on a daily basis, to listen to the things that they're creating, to understand the challenges that they face while doing it, and even getting into the brain of what to do next when, as a leader, most of the things that we're faced with are questions and finding solutions to questions and kind of the decision-making process. So from an R&D tax credit perspective, there's multiple reasons why this is, for me, one of the most amazing things to focus my life on. Because one, from a tax perspective, educating early allows businesses to actually get return of the spend towards qualified R&D work that helps them continue to do that type of work. And then from an education standpoint, if I can get further and further always back to even just the concept stage to plant seeds on what you could potentially structure in order to optimize R&D spend, in order to make sure that you have some cash runway to get through some of the more challenging times of business, which is, that first 5 years even of just getting ramped up.
Yeah.
And then obviously from, a professional perspective, understanding this is one of the best business incentives that we do have. And most businesses are doing something that is basically trying to continue to make them relevant within their industry and taking risks in order to do that.
Yeah, that is really good. And I hadn't thought about it from that perspective until you had shared that with me. But just that idea that the tax credit itself can be almost like a injection of capital into your business to help you through, especially those early years. Can you help us to better understand some more like technical aspects of it? Because it's like, okay, I get it. It's a credit. And from what I know, you've got deductions, you got credits. Credits are always better because it's a direct one-for-one against your tax liability, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, but R&D tax credit, can you tell us like a little bit of like a background? Like what is this tactically, practically?
Yeah, absolutely. So the credit program itself on the federal level has actually been around for over 40 years. So the intention behind the credit remains the same, which is basically wanting to incentivize businesses who are taking risks to do something that they either haven't done before or to kind of advance our society or economics from an economic standpoint kind of in the global landscape. So the idea is to infuse businesses with the opportunity to kind of ease the burden of that spend and to continue to do it so that basically as a self-serving side of the government programs typically is so that we look good when compared to other nations, right? So it's this idea of kind of the dual benefit of keeping jobs in the US, trying not to incentivize as much from an outsourcing perspective, but really incentivizing what we keep here within the confines of our nation. And then from the perspective of kind of back to your point about the deductions and credits, the cool part about this too is typically businesses are already going to be spending on what is considered qualified research expenditures when they're going through these efforts or initiatives, whether it be building a software, building a new product. Basically, from a research perspective, the humans are typically the ones that are going to drive that effort. So they're going to spend money on humans, whether it be wages or 1099 contractors, whatever the case is. And then from that perspective, you're still retaining your deductions from a tax perspective. But then on top of that, you're driving a percentage benefit off of those same deductions as a credit, which, as Tony, you mentioned, is then the dollar for dollar reduction of taxes. There's also incredible opportunities to strategize how you actually use the credits. And that's really important too, because for a long time, people basically the only way to use the credit was going to be if you were a profitable business. And then after 2016, when the PATH Act changed that, now before you're even in revenue, there's opportunities to use the credit for a different purpose. And there's just a bunch of different, it's like a playbook of options when it comes to how do you use the credits, how do you drive the credits, what is right for you as a business or an organization.
And you know what's interesting, as you're sharing that, the thought that goes through my mind, and like, don't get me wrong, I think people have a good reason for feeling like they don't have a great relationship with the IRS and the US tax system. But I hear stories like this and I'm like, it looks to me like our, lawmakers are doing everything they can to really try to infuse, innovation in the marketplace. They're really trying to give benefits to these small business owners. I think where the biggest gap is a lack of education.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, and I think it's, I mean, again, so from, being a CPA and understanding obviously the back end of general public accounting, also understanding the plethora of information and the complexities of the tax code. If you look at even just some of the acts coming down, right? It's like, 900-page act just out of nowhere. So when you think about all of the information available, I mean, that's part of the reason also I chose to specialize in this area, is because I could see a definite need to understand not only the program itself, but how it applies.
Yeah.
And with changes coming, virtually every year, when it comes to case law, when it comes to adjustments, when it comes to the interaction of different programs, it is something really, I mean, I have two brains on it, but the US is trying to make it easier for businesses here, and has been since, the 80s when this came out. Other countries do the same thing. And so a lot of pressure from inside, even headed towards Congress, is to actually increase the benefits for programs like these. Because if we want businesses to survive, if we want businesses to keep innovating, if we want to keep the employment numbers and wage numbers here, it's only in the best interest also that they continue to focus on these type of programs.
Yeah, that's so great. So I want to make sure that people didn't tune out for a minute. I want to make sure to kind of circle back to one thing that you said, because I think it was mind blowing to me. I had a hunch when you were first saying it, and then I listened, we were talking about it, and then you said it again. But just so you hear, not only do you get a deduction for these costs, for the most part, you get deduction for the costs, but you also get a credit, right? I mean, obviously there's facts and circumstances that are unique to every single person, so we're not giving broad advice, but generally speaking, it's almost like a doubling up benefit that the R&D tax credit has to offer, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I like that too, because it's not that you're going out of your way to do something different than you're already doing. It's just being able to set up a framework to be able to capture and optimize what you're already doing in a way that aligns to something as complex and brain damaging as the code. So that's kind of where I come in, right? That translation, or that bridge between what is all this boring tax code stuff and how does it actually matter to business owners, and then how do I partner too with other CPAs in order to offer that bridge, because again, we all kind of have to bind together in order to serve clients because of the complexity of the landscape.
That's totally the case. Okay, you also had touched on very briefly that in 2016 there was also kind of like a slight tweak that happened that allows for instances where you've got pre-revenue or maybe non-profitable businesses to still get benefit for the R&D. Can you talk about, well, just before I do that, one more setup here. Generally speaking, R&D tax credit.
You mean putting a leash on me? Is that what you're saying?
No. I just want to give some more context behind this, because I know this now because I'm talking with you and now I'm much better educated. But the R&D tax credit is primarily a income tax credit. However, what you were just saying, where you have a not profitable business or maybe a pre-revenue business, you were just saying, but there is kind of like an additional element that was added, so there can still be benefit in non-profitable years, pre-revenue years. Can you share a little bit about what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to double down what you said, because this is also something that I see a discrepancy in understanding in, where the R&D tax credit encapsulates both of these kind of tax plays. So from the perspective of, typically you get a tax credit, it flows down, it offsets your income tax. What Tony's mentioning is basically this idea of being able to create a different election to use that credit towards payroll taxes instead within certain circumstances. So it is an election that you can make. It is based off of kind of the same qualification standards and all of that kind of stuff. It's part of the same program. But in 2016, when that went into play, basically there was a few things that changed. One of the main things was the R&D tax credit wasn't even a permanent part of the tax code until then. At that point, when it became permanent, they opened up the ability for basically startup pre-revenue businesses that are spending money towards their MVPs or the building of things, spending money on payroll, and they're within the first 5 years of their first gross receipt. And that's an important kind of timeline. So if you have no gross receipts and you're kind of cranking away, and maybe you self-funded, or maybe you got some investment and you hired some developers or engineers, or you started a project, basically what ends up happening is you can then capitalize more immediately on the R&D tax credits, because even though you have the option of carrying forward credits, meaning if you drive credits, say this year, but you have no profit, and you want to carry them forward, on the federal side, you have 20 years to do that. Usually what I like to zone in on is where are you going to get the benefit the quickest, and how do we make sure that we're capitalizing on the reality as we know it today, because we never know what's going to happen next year, right? So it is the idea of taking a payroll offset is allowing you to immediately use that after you file your tax return. There's a bunch of rules in there too, but I won't bore anybody with that right now. But basically the idea is you can more immediately use the credits and start offsetting the employer portion of your payroll taxes on the federal side. And then that will ease the burden of that liability. And then in the next year, we look at the scenario again and say, okay, does it make sense to do the same thing? And like I said, 5 years, the clock starts from your first gross receipt.
That is so good, and it's interesting, and I feel like it helped me when I heard you talking about it, because for me, I thought to myself, oh, R&D tax credit is exclusively a payroll tax credit, which is that's not accurate. We see it oftentimes in startup businesses as a payroll tax credit because of what you were just talking about, which is the election. And something else you had mentioned to me was, hey, by the way, that election is an annual election. So at whatever point in time it makes sense, you can change your election to make it an income tax credit, right?
Yep, absolutely. I mean, once you elect it, you can't change it, but for the next year, exactly, you can. And from a perspective of like urgency on those kind of things, I mean, even even like the tax code or any law, right? You just keep making laws when things go wrong. So I feel like I do the opposite thing, where I realize something got spoken maybe incorrectly, or I'm noticing a theme, and then I'll have to back up and say, okay, so let's kind of re-educate on this as well. So this is one of the things that I'm seeing very commonly misunderstood, just because too, a lot of us that have like bleeding hearts for the startup and entrepreneurial landscape, a lot of times we will be dealing with people that for the first few years, they're really either relying on grants, or they're relying on self-funding, or they're relying on investment to kind of get over that hump of profitability. So from that perspective, we'll see the payroll tax credit a lot. And then from the income tax play, again, it's one of those things where you just want to year over year evaluate a strategy, make sure it makes sense, and then individualize that for the businesses that we're working with.
That's so good. So you had just talked about misunderstandings, and I think that's a perfect segue. I want to do, we don't have to make it a lightning round, but we can make it a lightning round. We're going to play truth or myth, okay? Or fact or myth, okay? So I'm going to make some statements, and I would love it if you could help us to understand, is this a myth? Is this a fact? So first one's first. Tiffany, I'm not really doing anything innovative, therefore I'm not eligible for this tax credit.
So most often a myth.
I'm
bad at lightning round,
okay.
Apparently. Give me words.
That's good.
Myth. Is that it? That's
myth. No,
okay.
no. You can expand it. That's why I was like, maybe it's not actually a lightning round.
but no, I mean, that one's harder, because then my question is, okay, awesome. Let's have a conversation about what the heck you're actually doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if somebody they just assume I'm not really doing anything innovative, therefore there's no possible way that I'm eligible for this. Your response would be?
Yeah, my response would be, let's have a conversation about what you're actually doing. And what I can say where this comes from a lot of times is, at least from my perspective, out looking in, is brilliant people often misunderstand their own brilliance when it comes to the field and the technical ability that they have, because it's the work that they do. So for me, kind of my coming back to that is, it actually doesn't even matter if you think you're innovative. Let's figure out what you're doing and see if the IRS would consider that innovative based on their set of criteria. But those conversations too, it's just basically, it's redefining kind of internally how we see these words. And when you deal with the tax code, if anybody is ever, had the pleasure of reading anything in the tax code, which I think everybody probably listening to this has. But the idea is you're taking the criteria and you're making sure to overlay that in a way that makes sense that you can support. And kind of the secondary benefit from my perspective, obviously, is then poking in on, okay, so you knew what you were doing right at the beginning, nothing didn't work, or no, I tried this and then this happened, I tried this and then this happened, and then lacing that into a conversation about experimentation. So you were basically taking the knowledge that you had, trying something, it failed, you went to the next thing. He's like, yeah, but that's what I do. I was like, well, precisely, that's what we're here to talk about. So there you go.
Yeah, and obviously there's more conversation to be had on that, because there's more things to be aware of in the determination. But yeah, are you employing essentially the scientific method to your, what is it that you're trying to create? So that's good. So that was myth, is what we determined. Just because you're not doing anything, you don't think you're doing anything innovative, doesn't necessarily mean you're ineligible. Okay, number 2. Okay, Tiffany, this is a grant, so I have to go get pre-approval for it, right?
Yeah, myth. So this is hard too, and I would say a lot of times in the startup arena too, if you're used to going after SBIRs or any type of grant funding just in general, there is pretty a laborious process that's involved on the front end to get accepted. This is not that. What this is the work that we do on the front end is to establish your qualification, to make sure we're building out documentation, to help on optimization and tracking process moving forward. But when you actually submit to the IRS, you're submitting as far as claiming the credits on your return. So it's not an asking for, it is a claim. So it's basically another form, like any other form that goes into your tax return, that you're going to include in there that shows how much you're going to get back for the R&D credits. And that's kind of the process. So
no pre-approval needed. This is a claim. As long as you are eligible for it per the tax code, which a person like Tiffany would help you to suss out, this could be something that you could claim on your tax return. That's good. Yep. Okay, so number 3, I don't have any employees, so therefore I can't get the credit.
So, myth. Sorry.
Myth, okay.
I'm so bad at rules. No, I'm just kidding. So this one is interesting because, again, I think a lot of times this goes back to the misconception on the payroll tax credit being the only way you can get an R&D credit. So that's one of the reasons. The other thing that's interesting is depending on how an entity is structured, and sometimes I'll deal with a single owner that has a Schedule C business and they don't have any employees, but they're profitable. That bottom line net income that's subject to SE tax is effectively their wage. So even in a scenario where there's a single person doing work, there's still a potential that they would be able to have an expense item that would drive a credit. So usually, again, one of these conversations would just be looking under the hood, kind of doing an establishment of the fact-finding mission, and then saying usually myth if there's anything else there. So.
Right. Okay. So I don't have to have employees necessarily in order to qualify for the credit. That's good to know. Next one. Let's see. There is a cap on this after a certain number of years. Surely this tax credit is going to run out after I've used it enough.
Oh, myth.
So
as we mentioned, the payroll tax offset as an election is something you can only do for a certain amount of time. The other income tax play from an R&D perspective, again, though there's going to be limitations based on the activities you do, the profitability, the expenses, things that are going on in your business specifically, there's no cap as far as what you're able to gather on the federal side. I would say, which I haven't really dove into yet, is obviously it's a federal program, which means it hits every state on the federal level, but the majority of states also have their own tax credit program. So I would say the caps and different rules oftentimes come into play when we start looking at different states from that perspective. But on the federal side, you're not looking at, a lifetime croaking of the credit just because you did a lot of really good work and now you don't get it anymore.
Right. It's in theory, it's something that like every year you could be coming back and you might have eligible R&D tax credits to do. I'm glad that you mentioned that though, because what you're talking about is federal and then state. Actually, in this course that I'm developing that's going to be launching hopefully by the end of the summer, which I'm so excited for, one of the things we talk about in chapter 3 called brass tacks, it's a little kind of like a background on tax. I talk about there's I say basically like 4 layers of government. And then there's like 15, depending on how you slice and dice, there's like 15 different types of taxes. And so what we were talking about before, just to kind of tie these concepts in for people, income tax is separate and distinct from payroll tax. They function differently. Now, granted, you're probably going to see payroll tax, in tandem with income tax, because a lot of times there's, if you're a self-employed individual, you're probably going to be paying in payroll taxes potentially at the end of the year, blah, 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 whatever. But they're separate and distinct tax concepts. And then what you just said about federal tax and then state tax is, fun fact, unless you live in 4 or 5 different states in the union that they don't have income tax, most states, or maybe there's more. Are there more states that don't have income tax? I don't even know.
I try not to count in my head.
Probably a good idea. I know where I live, we have state income tax, but you're going to have rules at the federal level that are applicable to federal income tax, and those might not be the same rules for state purposes. So that's kind of...
I kind of usually when I explain it too, it's like each state its own little country. So when you look at the global landscape, it's kind of similarly when we look within, our borders, because most of the time they'll have the right to employ different rules at the state level, which is absolutely true with R&D credit. Some of them are pretty aligned. Some of them take a wide left. Yep.
Very, very much so. Okay. Well, that's super insightful, super helpful. Second to last one. I am a software developer. I'm a software developer. Therefore, I am eligible.
Very determined. But these should, instead of being myth or fact or myth, it should be what is the it depends.
It depends. Yep.
They're all it depends.
Yep.
But yeah, no, it is. So there is no for sure based on that, right? So the idea is, how are you structured? How do your clients pay you? The idea is obviously software development as an activity is something that very closely aligns to the qualification standards, the 4-part test within the IRS. But the idea is even deeper when you start talking about a software developer doing things for clients, a software developer getting hired by somebody externally. So if you're the one initiating the innovation and there's no third party, meaning there's not a client or you're not hiring anybody externally from your firm, then usually you're going to be the one owning the rights and risk because there's nobody else involved, right? The moment you get another person involved, there's another establishment of who within this relationship basically has substantial rights for the R&D process, the process of discovering new information, the product or the process. And then at the end of the day, who has the financial risk? So those are things that I can tell you keep me up at night when I have conversations too late or meet people too late in the game where a contract's already been signed, $500,000 already gone out the door. Oof. And there's nothing that we can do at this point because maybe it wasn't structured in a way that would actually either get either party in a really good position to make claim to the credit, or maybe it gave the party that wasn't supposed to get the credit or whatever the case is. So proactive conversations on that, 100% please.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I even just think and this is probably a gross oversimplification, but in my, simple terms, I'm like, who's taking the risk, right? If I'm the customer and I'm like, I'm only paying you the $500,000 if you deliver and it's a perfectly executed, software package, blah, 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 blah. In that scenario, I don't have risk. I'm not going to pay them unless they give me a finished product. In that scenario, theoretically, the one who's doing the development work is taking the risk on because they're, they don't know for sure if it's going to end up being a total flop or if it's going to work swimmingly. So it really kind of depends primarily on risk. Would that be a safe simplification?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to encapsulate it 100% because it does come down to that. And I think the way that you mentioned, basically at the end of the day, are you going to deliver something anyway? That's kind of a difference of buying an end product versus having skin in the game of developing something.
Right. Super, super interesting. Okay, I have one last one. This one's a really tough one for you.
Okay.
Tiffany Bisconer is amazing.
Open poll.
Drop some comments down below. Let me know what you think. No, the conclusive answer for that, the right answer for that, Tiffany, is fact. That's not even it depends. It's just a fact. But Tiffany, I really appreciated this. What did I tell you? I told you we're gonna go for sure beyond the time limit because this is just fun. We love chatting, and this was super easy. You make make this just super easy. But I just really appreciate you taking the time today. Tiffany, I want to give you an opportunity to share some words of wisdom. And the specific person I would love for you to speak to right now, just have a heart-to-heart with right now on this chat, is that accountant that is out there right now who is feeling the drain of working in an environment that does not align with them personally and or professionally. What words of wisdom would you give to that person?
Oh, call me. I think for me, it comes back to like, live your questions like deeply. Don't let anybody tell you who you are or what you need to be doing. Grab times to make sure that you're actually listening. And I think from the perspective of, I think what we could all do better is really being able to identify what we want in the pathway of life, how we want to walk our path, basically. Because I think the manner in which we travel is what is really important. The do part, there's a lot of things to do in the world, right? And a lot of people will tell you what to do. But at the end of the day, if something feels off to you, I implore you, if there's somebody that you trust that you can talk through it, do it. If you're feeling unseen, unheard, and squashed, literally, please send me a message. Let's chat, because I think within industry specifically also, there's a lot of opportunities and there's a lot of ways to forge a path where you can take the knowledge that you've gained and put it to use in a way that lightens you up. You know, it's always going to be a grind to a certain point when you work hard, but from the perspective of wanting your time to matter, it needs to matter based on your own parameters. So ask the questions, ask the deep questions, dive into what it is that you want to experience in your life. And we spend so much time working, you know, within this time that we have, that you want to make sure that you're able to give the best of you to the people around you. And that is your clients, that is your coworkers, that is your family, that is your staff. And if you're a leader within the field, I ask you from the bottom of my heart, make sure you see your people. Make sure that you create pathways that allow them to grow, because that is the greatest asset that you have within your organization. The opportunity for people to actually create new pathways and potentials for your business and for the people around them. If that is not highlighted, if that is not supported, we're not doing justice to the best assets we have.
Yeah, that's right. That is so good. And I'm appreciative of that you articulated it that way. I will just say, for anybody who's watching, Tiffany absolutely is one of the easiest people to talk to. So I would definitely take her up on that offer if you have the chance. But yes, Tiffany, thank you so much. Where can people go to find you? Let's say they do have questions, they have some follow-up. Where can people connect with you? Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok? Where are you at?
So hopefully I won't get social media shamed, because I am like horrible at keeping up with all the platforms, but LinkedIn is probably the best place to find me personally. And then connect with me there, and then we can figure out deeper conversations.
Fantastic. All right. You heard it here. Check with her on LinkedIn. If you ever are curious about her, like how to find her, you can always find me, and then her and I are connected too. So that is also definitely an option. But again, thank you, Tiffany, so much. And I want to say thank you to all of you who've been listening. I hope you found value in our episode today. If you have a pressing accounting question that you would like future guests to answer, you can go ahead and email them to me at tony@equip.com. That's spelled ACCQUIP.com. Also, if you are an accounting professional or you know one that would be interested in coming on the show, please reach out to me as well. I want to thank you all again so much for tuning in. And as always, keep calm and keep your clothes on.